Hi, this is Michelle Goldman with Java 2, our final week 4, and we had to create 4 projects this week. I'll go through each of them one at a time. This application, we were required to create at least 2 screens, a list and an add. I added a third one for detail, and our application should load with a blank list, which is what I've got here. We're required to have an add button in the action bar, so I click on add. That loads my survey list form, and I can add in some data and then click on save, which was another requirement to have save up here in the action bar as well. There's also a reset form in the overflow, which we're required to have. That resets everything. And I'll just enter it again and then click on save. My biggest issue was that when I click on save, this activity is not automatically returning to the previous one. I can click on back and it will load my main activity with that entry listed in the list now. I can click on the item and get to the detail, and I can also delete from here, which was just an added thing that I put in. We'll just put in some dummy data, save, and if you tap and hold, you get the contextual action bar menu so that you can either dismiss or you can delete the item. So that takes care of the requirements as far as the code. So this is my main fragment, and here in the action mode method, which is set up with the necessary callbacks to be able to create and prepare and set up that action listed here. We've got that code set up here for the survey add when I actually get into that activity. In the on options item selected, that's where we've set up the if-else statement so that depending on what you're selecting from the action bar, whether you want to save or reset the form, be able to load the necessary fragment and handle it from there. And then on the detail activity, which I don't have up there anymore because they're all gone, but in the detail activity as far as actually deleting the item, just finding that item by position from the list, removing that, and then using an intent to be able to send that information back to the main activity and then write that information to persistent storage. So the Case 1 study required that you build an application that serves as a roster for a Little League baseball team or league with 6 teams of 9 players, and they would like the application to allow the user to select a team and display the names for each member of the selected team. So this one seemed to be the easiest for me. What I did was incorporate the spinner. So I used the tab application template and then just incorporated the spinner. And since there are 6 teams, just list each of the teams here in the drop down and then just select each team, and you can see that the list is updating as I select each team. So that seemed to be the most appropriate one for those requirements for the first case study. As far as handling that code, it really was just the main activity and then 6 fragments. It's all pretty much the same data except for the list of team members, and of course 6 fragments to accompany those. And the primary coding was in the on navigation item selected, where you want to set up your fragments, load the fragment manager, and then set up an if-else statement. So depending on the position of what you select from the spinner, will load that particular fragment. The second case study required us to build a weather application prototype using the Weather Underground API. So based off of that, using 3 features that are offered: detailed forecast for the current time, hour by hour or hourly, as well as a weekly forecast. This one actually was not too difficult either. What I selected was the tab navigation with the actual tabs, since there are only 3 levels, top levels, that the user would need to navigate between quickly. That seemed to make the most sense. So when you load the application, it automatically loads into the current forecast, which would be the most relevant. And then you can take a look at hourly and then weekly. For my application, I simply just took images from online and loaded those in so it would simulate what weekly, hourly, or current view might look like. So the coding was pretty simple. We have the main activity and then 3 fragments for the current, hourly, and weekly, and of course the accompanying XML layout files. And the majority of the work was really done in the main activity. So once selecting that application template, everything for the view pager was set up for you automatically. And then under the tab section for the pager adapter, that's where in the get item method, just set up a switch statement after first setting up the fragments. And then just depending on which position, 0, 1, or 2, it would load that specific fragment. And of course the count was already set for you since there are 3 tabs, and then just setting the page title, which just changed those names in the strings XML file, and that's all there was to it. Finally, for our third case study, we were required to build a news application prototype that would use static data with 4 main features. There would be a main page for featured story, which would load automatically, news page for recent stories, should be a list of recent stories, and an image gallery for viewing breaking news images. And then lastly, the settings page to be able to disable data over mobile. So let's take a look at the code in the app. So as the app loads, we see the menu icon here with the drawer. Loads to the featured story, which is highlighted, and you can see behind the navigation drawer. Go to recent stories and image gallery. I just simply again loaded images to represent what those different activities would look like. Image gallery, a list of recent stories, and featured story. And then of course in the action bar in the overflow we have the option to go to settings and then be able to disable data over mobile. And that's a clickable preference, and mobile data has been disabled. And I just go back and I'm back to the main featured story. As far as the code, nothing too difficult. Of course, we've got our fragments for each of the 3 activities or screens for the stories. The main activity, this is really where the majority of the coding is happening on navigation drawer item selected, where you're going to use a switch statement and select by position, and depending on the position that you select, it will load that fragment. And on section attached, that's the section up here, featured story, recent stories, and image gallery, which lines up here. One of the issues that I did have, once I set up my switch statement in the on navigation drawer item selected method, I lost the naming up in the action bar. Prior to that, if I clicked on recent stories would show up here in the action bar. I was having a couple of issues with the action bar in general. Apparently, I ran an update during the week during creating these applications, and in some of my applications, action bar activity is now deprecated. Some of them it is not. Was calling a slightly different method for the get action bar instead of get support action bar, but didn't get that working. I think those were the biggest hiccups for the week. Of course, we've got our preference activity, which is what's controlling the settings here to disable that data over mobile. And the activity just calls the fragment, and then the preference fragment, this is where we just set that